This week, Kelly Shortridge, Senior Principal Product Technologist at Fastly, will be here to talk about Deciduous, decision trees, and security chaos engineering. Next up, Deb Radcliff, the Strategic Analyst and Author from the CyberRisk Alliance, will join us to discuss penning a cyber thriller. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Guardicore has an announcement to stop ransomware. Netskope streamlines procedures with improved attribution models and collaboration. Cloudflare claims they blocked the greatest DDoS attack in history. Security Scorecard partners up with Tenable to improve risk management. Sumo Logic delivers on the SOAR promise by acquiring DF Labs. SCAR invests in cyber startup Hook Security. Hunters raises $30 million in a Series B, and so much more. Stay tuned for Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome to episode number 240 of Enterprise Security Weekly for August 25th, 2021. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Adrian Sanabria. Adrian, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Looking forward to both our interviews today. We two book authors.
Yeah,
two book authors awesome. In a row.
Yeah,
it's going to be some good stuff.
Really good. Mr. Tyler Shields is here. We're working on getting him reconnected back into the show. Tyler, welcome. Okay, well, we'll do that after. He will be here for this episode. So, a quick announcement. Join us on August 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to learn how to implement cloud security that actually works. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register today. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, don't forget this Thursday, tune into Paul Security Weekly. I'm super excited about a technical segment that I am giving on OpenVAS. That's right. You learn how to compile it from scratch, because if you don't know how it works under the covers when it breaks, you'd be really screwed. And I went through all of the pain for you, and we'll show you how all that works. It's going to be a lot of fun. Kelly Shortridge built the app Deciduous with Ryan Petrick. Deciduous simplifies the process of creating security decision trees, which are crucial aids for threat modeling and prioritizing mitigations. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's nice to have you. Kelly, I want to get started with, well, I guess first, how did you get your start in information security?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a weird start. I actually started out as an investment banker doing M&A, as well as some private capital raises, both for cybersecurity companies and data analytics companies. And I really liked the finance part, actually, but I fell in love with really digging into the technology and the market problems. So right after banking, I founded my own startup, which was acquired, and since then have been doing a myriad of different kind of product roles, trying to solve various security and resilience problems felt by users.
Outstanding. What is a security decision tree?
Yes, so decision trees are not exclusive to cybersecurity, to be clear. Probably some of the audience is familiar with game theory, and one of the key concepts or tenets in game theory, at least for sequential games, is one player makes a move, think like chess, then another player is going to respond to it. So one of the aids that can help you make better decisions in a game context, again, let's say it's chess, it could be nuclear war at the other end of the spectrum. You want to try to anticipate your opponent's moves. A lot of people stick to what's called first order thinking. So it's, I'll make a move and maybe you'll think about, how your opponent will respond to it. But the beauty of decision trees and this underlying principle called belief prompting is that if you prompt yourself to think about, okay, I make this move, the attacker will respond this way, and then what do I do next? What will they do next? And you start really anticipating like all of the different like branches and opportunities, kind of like if you've seen the show Loki recently, like the multiverse, like there are all these kind of like avenues that could happen. So being able to map that out in a visual way through a decision tree can be incredibly useful, again, just to kind of document your assumptions about how things are going to work. And in a cybersecurity context, it can actually start evaluating, like, let's say with, like phishing, that's probably easier for an attacker than like trying to find some sort of like ODA in AWS's control plane, right? It's a lot easier just to try to steal credentials. So you can start to see that on the tree. Maybe one branch has phishing, another branch has ODA, and then you can really get a better sense of like, okay, what's most likely to happen in my systems for a particular kind of use case, and what are the kind of easy path for attackers that think low-hanging fruit that we can mitigate first. Because I think many people have seen that sometimes we buy like sexy, shiny, like anti-APT stuff when we still have huge problems with, again, like phishing and things that are accidentally made public. And a decision tree can just help you really like have a visual guide, help you collaborate on figuring out what actually is the best course of action in terms of mitigations, and like what is the most likely attack path, at least that you anticipate for whatever system is in question, whether like an S3 bucket or like some sort of like, again, production service. It could be even just your, something related to Active Directory. Like you can choose whatever. The whole point is just you're seeing like, okay, attacker will probably start by trying this. We'll mitigate it with this, and then what are they going to do next? And a lot of people don't think about that, like how are attackers going to evolve or change their kind of like decision-making criteria based on the mitigations that are in place, because they won't just stop or give up, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a more structured way to do threat modeling in a sense.
Yes, exactly. And I think the beauty here is it's because it's domain agnostic, it's something that is pretty intuitive. For instance, if you're having to collaborate with software engineering teams on building threat models for like a new system or some sort of end user facing like service, it makes it a lot clearer than just talking about like, oh yeah, here's kind of at an abstract level, here are the risks that we think about. Instead, it's like, nope, these are kind of exactly the things that we think attackers will consider, and it can be very elucidating for people who aren't in security all the time to understand like, oh, that makes total sense how attackers will escalate their investment, and like, again, paying attention to some of those low-hanging fruit where maybe a simple design change could actually eliminate that path entirely, which is really powerful.
Yeah, it's all about eliminating the variance.
Yes.
Yeah, and it seems like, I don't know, a lot of conversations I have when I'm advising companies and having some of these conversations, seem like those feel like I'm taking crazy pills types of conversations where, it seems like something like a decision tree, can help you deal with a lot of these emotional biases and inherent human biases that we have when making decisions, and you'll be having this conversation, and you're like, well, these basic things get the attackers in every time. And they're like, but this is cool. This is really cool. And then they go buy the cool, shiny thing anyway. But, and it's just after a point, it's not satisfying to say, I told you so anymore. So I love that it's visual. I think something visual, like you can fit a whole decision tree, and you've got many examples in this book that fit on a single page. And for me, at least, and I've noticed some of the people I work with, that goes a long way. Like you can verbally say what's on that page till you're blue in the face, but something about seeing it, at least to me, makes it much more valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important for kind of a knowledge culture. You want transparency and accessibility, and even again, notes in a document, like that can be tough. But when you literally have a visual aid, if let's say an incident happens and you realize that, oh, maybe we had some like assumptions that were missing, or like, yeah, we got the assumptions correct, but we thought the attacker might try this first versus what they actually did. You can literally just like take that and in like a Zoom meeting like we're on now, start, pointing to the different assumptions. You can cross things out and obviously update them. It's like a very flexible sort of kind of like knowledge capture device, which again, I think documentation is something safe to say, not just in InfoSec. Basically, anyone in engineering kind of hates putting it together, but I like to think this is a slightly more fun way of actually doing threat modeling exercises and having kind of this living document that can evolve over time.
Yeah, I like the living document because I feel like a tabletop incident response exercise, it doesn't often produce documentation as you're referencing.
Exactly. Yep. And it means that, I think something you hear about a lot is the, cyber skills shortage. And at the very least, it means there's generally a lot of turnover. You can have lots of new people rather than them having to go talk to a bunch of different people to get a sense of like, okay, what's our, threat profile across different resources. Now there's these decision trees. Again, they'll share a common format, and hopefully it will be easier for them to get up to speed. And kind of in that vein, if you have multiple decision trees, maybe you see, for instance, like most likely two-factor authentication applies to a lot of different kind of like threat modeling scenarios as far as a mitigation. So if you start comparing the trees and you see particular mitigations that keep coming up, particularly again on those kind of easy paths for attackers, then that's, to me, very strong signal that that's somewhere you should invest. Again, if it's some, upstream supply chain attack and that's only relevant for, some super critical application that's in some private, AWS, whatever, like probably you don't need to invest in that first versus like, again, the two-factor stuff and a lot of the basics that people talk about but often don't actually implement.
Yeah, like one control can eliminate multiple timelines and variants.
Exactly. It's a good analogy.
Yeah, Paul's he gets those Loki references in there.
Yeah, I like Loki. That's a good one.
Quite a bit.
Such a good show. Yeah.
Hey Kelly, I have a question for you. Real quickly, do you recommend tying quantification metrics to the decision trees, a la like EV or expected value metrics, when you think of it in game theory terms?
Yes, and that's actually something. I think in the Black Hat talk I gave in 2017, I did have the kind of probability figures on the decision tree itself. Right now, we don't have that in Deciduous. I think it's still early enough. I mean, the Security Chaos Engineering ebook only came out late last year, right? So not everyone's read it yet. So I think getting people kind of just comfortable with decision trees in general for threat modeling is step one. One thing we are considering, and shout out to the fact that Ryan and I are actively collecting feedback on Deciduous as we plan on building out the feature set. One of the things we have in mind, I think it was Ryan McGeehan, who goes by Magoo, suggested it, is having some sort of input field so you can assign probabilities, like how likely you think it is for an attacker to pursue one action versus another, which can definitely get interesting, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see you adding probabilities to be able to calculate kind of the risk reward of going down a certain tree, and then coupling that with the potential for financial loss to get a true expected value on each tree path. But that's kind of taking it to the full extent of game theory and probability modeling. Yeah,
and I would say that there can be numbers can impart a sense of safety and control. I would say the vast majority of organizations I talk to aren't really ready to actually think about probability. Like right now, I think we're still at the phase where we need people to just embrace some of the lessons from behavioral game theory, and which is different, by the way, different outcomes than with traditional kind of theoretical game theory, because behavioral game theory looks at how people actually behave, which is not purely rational, so to speak. So I think it's just good to encourage security teams to start just get familiar with kind of some of the 101s around behavioral game theory. And if you want to do fancier stuff, you better make sure that you haven't ignored some of the basics, because it's going to look kind of silly if you have all this fancy risk modeling and math around it, and then you had a very obvious snafu, like a YOLO sec sort of thing, somewhere else on the tree. So I would say be humble when starting out with decision trees, and then expand your program from there.
Yeah, I love that. Build the basics, build the foundation, and go up from there.
Exactly. Yeah, and test again, it can be useful to just even start with maybe something that's not quite as critical, and see how the decision tree works out and what are the changes, get feedback from other stakeholders, whether, again, that could be legal, finance, but especially, again, engineering peers. Make sure that the organization kind of feels comfortable before going on all in. I mean, I would love if everyone in security used Deciduous, right? But that's the real advice is start with, start building up kind of that culture from a grassroots perspective. Don't just force it on everyone all at once.
So one thing you mentioned earlier that I think was really interesting to me, something I hadn't considered, talking about documenting what actually happened. I think a large part of what we're talking about is preparation, but before the incident happens, but it sounds like you were saying it's also useful to document, like during lessons learned, to see where maybe your decisions tree, we're missing some things, overlay them and see what was missing and maybe improve your models. Is that where you were going with that?
Yes, so it really is two use cases, like you said, preparation and threat modeling. But part of the kind of underpinning of security chaos engineering, other than experimentation, and it's related to this, is kind of a continuous learning culture, making sure that you have like really strong feedback loops. Probably people in the audience are familiar with OODA loops. It's very similar to that. So when you're doing an incident retrospective, whether that is because of an experiment, like a security chaos engineering experiment, or a real incident, if you pull up the decision tree, there are two key benefits. One is there's a tendency to succumb to outcome and hindsight bias whenever doing those things. We're like, oh, well, of course it should have been obvious that we should have patched this thing sooner, whatever it is, right? And so having that kind of visual aid that shows your documented assumptions makes it a lot easier to pinpoint, like, okay, like here's where like the knowledge gap was, like, and that can inform basically like where the knowledge gaps might be on other decision trees. So it helps kind of counter some of that bias and keep you more objective in like being able to kind of more objectively, I guess, analyze the assumptions you had beforehand rather than succumbing to those biases. The second key benefit is obviously incident retrospectives ideally are blameless, but they can be heated. And so having this document and having the tree can help keep people kind of neutral rather than pointing fingers at any one particular team or party. It's like, okay, now we're collaborating on this, blame the tree if you want to. It's like, oh, the tree was bad. But at least then you're not blaming each other or saying that, oh, like, so-and-so was stupid or silly for having overlooked this thing, especially if you built the tree in the first place collaboratively.
The thing we try not to say, which is I told you so.
Yes, exactly. And that can even be helpful, is showing that, well, we had identified that this is a potential path attackers could have taken, and we had a proposed mitigation, but it wasn't implemented. That can be really powerful kind of going forward to get buy-in. And again, you can start to see once you build out multiple trees, like if there was a gap here, that probably means that there's a similar gap in, these different systems. So you can kind of, again, continuously refine those assumptions you have about attacker behavior, which get very powerful.
The tree told you so is basically how you should phrase it, right?
Yes. So that's a big part of the book. That's actually where you start out in the book, is getting into kind of the emotions of it, and the, I think in a lot of organizations, it's kind of a cultural, missing cultural piece, embracing failure and in a culture that learns from failure instead of blaming people. And I still run into people regularly that, they want to hire a CISO who's never been through a breach, or, somebody, that has breaches on their resume is somehow undesirable. And to me, that's a bit bizarre. It's like, why would you, as common as they are these days, why would you want somebody who's completely, a whole team, security team that's completely inexperienced, with this kind of like ultimate negative outcome that we're trying to protect against?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, failure is a fantastic teacher. And I think I agree, there's a cultural stigma kind of against failure. And I think a lot of the market kind of distortions we see, certainly in terms of the tools that are being purchased, even some of the policies and practices that are way too heavy-handed, and the reason why InfoSec has branded the Department of No, because we're always trying to prevent something that's inevitable from happening. I think we can all agree, like, it's interesting. I don't necessarily agree with the attackers only need one way in and you have to cover literally everything. Yeah. You don't have to cover literally everything. Not everything matters. But if that is true, then even so, you certainly can't be taking the general, again, cultural thing around this is figuring out the best way to put it. I guess it's really important in any sort of culture to say failure is inevitable. Let's learn from it. Let's not blame everyone. And importantly, let's try to recover from it as soon as possible. So it's a subtle shift from let's try to prevent failure to let's recover from failure as quickly as possible. But underlying that, it kind of belies its actual power, because when you shift away to that mindset, you actually buy a whole different suite of tools. Some of the traditional kind of blocking things or, preemptive scanning, you're going to have to buy that for compliance anyway, right? But when you move from the mindset of like, oh my God, we have to stop it from happening in the first place, which is impossible. It's like absolutely impossible. I think it's both freeing emotionally, but it's also freeing in terms of like, now you can focus on more strategic work, make sure you're building muscle memory about responding to incidents without feeling bad when the inevitable does go wrong. We shouldn't feel so bad or guilty that something has happened. The whole point is like recover from it and move on. I think it's what I find beautiful both about security chaos engineering and the kind of resilience engineering as a macro category is that's true in any discipline, right? We're never going to stop hurricanes or natural disasters, but we can absolutely make sure we can recover from them, that we can evolve kind of our methods, like not build in flood zones as or earthquake zones, as like New Zealand did after the Christchurch earthquake. Like there are different tactics we can take to make ourselves more resilient to failure when it happens. But in InfoSec, that's not the mindset. And I think that's why, frankly, we don't see a lot of progress in the problem, because we're trying to stop something that decades of experience has shown us is impossible to stop.
I'd love to get your opinion on, so one thing that's kind of frustrated me is finding, real occurrences, real lessons learned from actual incidents. Unless it's huge like Equifax, and there's some kind of class action lawsuit or, something that results in sharing the details of the incident response report. Generally, we often don't find out exactly how that failure occurred. Do you feel like it's important to? Well, yeah, I'm figuring you're probably going to say yes. So I guess the question is more like how do we get that out? Does that have to be regulation? Where we basically force companies to share more details about what happened so that we can improve from it, or I don't know. Is it more of a cultural shift, where we get companies, more comfortable with sharing their mistakes?
I think to your point, there's some element of culture, because if people aren't even hiring CISOs who've been through incidents, like why are they going to talk about them, right? You've set up perfectly, though, a huge part of the rationale and justification behind security chaos engineering. So the idea is you inject faults into your system. Let's say it's like you make sure certain ports are open, and then you just see and experiment with like, how do things fail? Like, does that mean that suddenly you're getting like very much unwanted traffic? You can set up, I actually have a forthcoming paper talking about the concept of deception environments, but you can basically like create a shadow copy of prod to see, if you change different variables within that, how does it affect security posture? The long and short is basically security chaos engineering allows you to test your hypothesis about what will happen in certain kinds of incidents, allows you to see like, okay, is our alerting kind of working as expected? Was there anything that we didn't expect? For instance, maybe a like service that you think is relatively benign, let's say it doesn't process customer data. If you inject some sort of fault, like a just denial of service, and suddenly there's some sort of outage or downtime or whatever else that then indicates like, actually, this is kind of a centralized like risk node, so to speak, because it talks to other components. I think SolarWinds being a classic example of like, a lot of times we overlook the things that connect into everything else. But with security chaos engineering, you can experiment with like, what happens if, our automation server goes offline, as it would in like a DOS? What happens if we allow like, God mode sort of access into our containers? Like, what are the kind of like end results? And I think it's going to take a while culturally for us to get there, if we ever do, as far as sharing real incidents. But simulating those incidents and injecting failures and learning from them, that's something that's generally a lot friendlier, just on kind of like the psyche, which means that people may talk about it more. But even if people don't talk about it, it means that you're still kind of experimenting, building muscle memory around how to respond to failure and respond to incidents, because burnout is a huge, huge problem among incident responders, both on the security side and then also with SREs. So as much as you can help them kind of prepare for the inevitable and get more comfortable with different like playbooks as far as how to respond to things, the better. Like, you're going to have a much better incident response program. You're going to be able to focus on more strategic work versus fighting fires all the time. So the TLDR is like, experimentation is amazing. That's why it's one of the core kind of components of any sort of science. And if we want to treat InfoSec more like a science than like a painful exercise in trying to like finger paint our way to a strategy, then security chaos and engineering often offers basically one of the more scientific approaches, I would say, to InfoSec strategy.
Yeah, I love the idea of cyber ranges and breach and attack simulation. I've been very bullish on a lot of those products, but in my experience in chatting with folks, it's been very difficult to convince people to throw the extra resources, and expense that you have to, even just getting a test environment up and running so you can do proofs of concepts on products you're considering, can be tough to convince people to do. We're not NASA over here. If something bad happens, we'll deal with it. Is kind of the attitude you get a lot of the time.
I think with security chaos engineering and chaos engineering more generally, one, there's a lot of open source stuff, so you don't have to buy a tool. I also am somewhat skeptical about some of those tools, but that's probably a conversation for another time.
Yeah, that would be a good conversation, though.
Yeah, exactly. Like using things like serverless functions, that's a way that you can start injecting faults. It's also making sure that you, I'll put it this way, like I remember seeing at S4, the last S4 pre-pandemic, there was a talk, I'm totally blanking on the speaker's name, but she was talking about basically like doing chaos engineering sort of experiments. I believe it was for maybe a power plant. It was some sort of ICS. And if they can do it, promise most like Fortune 500s can absolutely do it. And I think this is a key area where, at least as Adrian knows, and probably other people know, I'm a huge proponent of collaborating with engineering teams and people like SREs, because they also deeply care about resilience. It's a total myth that they don't care about security. Availability is like the new lifeblood for any organizations that's delivering a digital service, or as we saw with some of the ransomware cases, just uptime and availability is crucial for just any business that really uses software to conduct their business operations. So the engineering side of the house is absolutely going to care about testing to see how systems respond to failure, especially on the availability side. So partner with them. Like it's much easier to get buy-in for projects if you have two different teams, like security and engineering, who are telling, let's say, executives like, hey, this is really important for us to do, and get started, like starting a chaos engineering program. You don't have to do it kind of in a silo. Like find friends where you can and justify business value beyond just security. Because frankly, again, like it doesn't matter if it's a developer, who just wants to YOLO and yeet around and prod, or if it's an attacker who got like dev credentials and is doing something similar to like see what could be juicy for them. Like it's still an incident that looks very much the same from the incident responder perspective. So that kind of partnership with your engineering colleagues just goes a really huge way towards justifying this sort of approach.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the model with the site reliability engineers, and I feel like it doesn't have as much adoption as we would like in security, but I think there's huge security benefits to building that, for lack of a better term, agile team, right, that has all of the responsibilities for DevOps and security in one team.
Yeah, I can also understand the security perspective, which is there are benefits to claiming that the knowledge you have, in this case, InfoSec expertise, can't be discerned or accumulated by other people, because it means you get paid more and you're more indispensable. So you have a slight incentive problem, I think, where InfoSec people can benefit from making the domain seem arcane, and like they have to, for the most part, like an application performance monitoring tool often provides the same sort of data that you would want for security purposes. However, if you are kind of working with the engineering team who's running that APM tool and just adopting it for your own use cases, that's not coming out of your budget, which you'd think is a good thing, but a lot of times security team efficacy or the security executives are judged based on, or prove growth based on how much their budget is growing, how many tools were they able to implement, how big is the team. So hence the incentive problem where partnering and saving money for the organization isn't actually often in a kind of like, it's not necessarily aligned with a security professional self-interest. And I think we definitely don't talk about that problem enough.
No, I agree. I think the goals for some people might be misunderstood, right? The goal is to get your teams to create resilient software. I don't care whose budget it comes out of. As long as they're producing resilient software, I'm still going to have a job in security. And I think there's a lot of insecurity around that, right?
Oh yeah, there's tons of insecurity, and I think it's difficult to tell any executive, I think this would be true, like, hey, actually, you only need half of your headcount and half of your budget, because that can feel like, oh, I'm actually not important, whereas it's actually you're vital in making sure that your knowledge can scale and disseminate.
Right.
But it's a framing difference that I don't think the industry is fully embraced yet, for sure.
Yeah, it's a shifting of that skills and knowledge into the other teams, which is, I think, a direction we need to push towards as an industry.
Yep, database administration has been going in the same direction. You used to have, armies of DBAs. They would have a separate team, and now most of the time they're either embedded on product and engineering teams directly, or they serve as advisors. But the databases are actually maintained, as part of the, the beauty of DevOps is like everybody's like both responsible and accountable.
Right.
And that's why I hate the term DevSecOps, because security is a part of resilience, which is a part of DevOps anyway. So I think it's totally redundant, and security done well would be sustainable enough that even if the security team all decided to, take a vacation, things wouldn't fall apart. If things would fall apart, if your security team all had a vacation for 1 week entirely, that's a bad security program.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks so much. And like I said, anyone who's using Deciduous, please feel free to give Ryan or myself feedback, because we want to make it better for the community.
Outstanding. Thank you. Coming up next, Deb Radcliff from CyberRisk Alliance. Stick around. Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Discover hidden network threats, automate security investigations, and optimize security workflows to stay a step ahead of attackers with Gigamon Threat Insight. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon. The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's in-person event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on the World Pass and main conference registration by visiting securityweekly.com/ISW 2021. Joining us for this segment is Deb Radcliff. Deb Radcliff was the first investigative reporter to make cybercrime beat in 1996 after researching a best-selling book about Kevin Mitnick called The Fugitive Game. Today, she joins us to discuss her newest release, Breaking Backbones: Information is Power. Deb, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Paul. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Deb. It is nice to have you here today. I want to ask, because in your bio you talked about covering Kevin Mitnick, and much has been written about that. And I find it interesting that a lot of the works that I read and when I talk to Kevin all give like slightly different angles on that. So was that like your first kind of foray into security?
Oh, yeah, it scared the boo-boo out of me. So I was a young mother with 3 little kids. And after I took the assignment from John Littman to work on a best-selling book about Kevin Mitnick on the run from the FBI, his friends found my unlisted phone number and started calling it and doing crazy things in the middle of the night. I had a reactive husband, so I had to pull the plug on all the phones. This was 1995. I called John Littman the next morning and said, I don't know if I can do this. I've got little kids, and those people came into my house last night. And so he called them and begged all of Mitnick's friends to leave me alone. I was a newbie at all of this, and I really was. It turned out his friends helped me get on the internet for the first time using a dial-up modem, trying to get through, I think it was Netscape. That didn't work. So I tried this new little service called America Online and paid long distance for it, even though I lived in a city of about 400,000 people. And then I just made it my beat from that point on. Some of the interesting things I learned about Kevin Mitnick at the time was he was being blamed for a lot of things that his friends did. I didn't like most of his friends. They were pretty scammy and they were exploitive of that relationship with Kevin. So I'm glad that he moved on and got into KnowBe4 and does what he does now in the area of education around not just hacking, but social engineering, which is what he was best at.
Yeah, for sure. It's certainly an interesting story. It's interesting to hear everyone's different kind of perspectives and takes on it, because it's very deep. And I think a lot of people coming in the field today don't, unless they've read a lot of those works, don't understand the whole story. And I think it's one that they should.
I think the feds used him and Kevin Poulsen as an example to try to, deter other people from hacking. But the problem was the feds, the judges that I saw in court, they didn't know what they were dealing with, and they were really scared. So they had both Kevins, I think, were in prison or jail for 4 years without a trial because no one knew how to try them. Today, their exploits seem minor compared to the stuff that real criminals are doing.
Yeah.
I consider them sort of the harbingers.
Oh, yeah, completely agree. So, Deb, what experiences have you been drawing on, other than what we just talked about, to write some of the books that you've been working on?
Oh, so much in this industry. So, as you know, there's a lot of hackers and hacker groups that started up in the 90s. We've got the Loft, we've got the Cult of the Dead Cow. There's many, many more. I used to go to their regular meetings, and I was there when Back Orifice was released, and I was there when polymorphism happened around antivirus, that made antivirus pretty much ineffective. So all those chilling moments were part of my career. And so there are people in my book that are based on Delchai, which is from another hacker group, the Hobbit, who's from the Loft. There is a representative from the Defense Department. Jim Christie is represented there in the DoD Forensics Labs. So these people have filled me in, clued me in, become characters over time in my head for this book that I wanted to show around the tech overreach. And in my mind, everybody's always afraid that it's going to be the government that really takes over our lives, but I've always felt that it was going to be private sector. So I made Globecom a private sector company that becomes a bit more powerful than government. And I worked with a lot of different characters that I met in my real life. I just translated them into fictional characters in the book. So Delchai is Mane, M-A-N-E, because he always reminded me of a lion. He had this red plaited hair that it looked like a lion's mane to me. And he always carried a lion head club, a cane when he went places. And he was sort of the goth prince of New York. So I went to a goth party with him and learned a lot about the goth scene. In fact, there's some music in book number 2 that comes from his community that I'm using lyrics from for one of the chapters. So these, it was just really helpful. I learned the culture, not just what they stood for. And I was able to put all of that into my fiction series, Breaking Backbones. And the premise is Globecom owns pretty much the whole world through human chip implants. And of course, they've got the data centers and they own the network, which is basically the internet at this point, but it's a futuristic version. And the hackers, they see it coming. Some of them go off grid. Some of them take the chips and learn how to hack their own chips because now they're being 100% monitored and they want to do some things that they don't want people to know about. So they're hacking their own chips. Meanwhile, the ones off grid are mounting an attack against Globecom. It's, as you know, breaking the internet is pretty much impossible. So how are they going to take down Globecom, which is, very powerful data centers around the world, network infrastructure, and the chips?
Yeah. And I like this premise from the hacker viewpoint because, these storylines have appeared in many science fiction works, but I think many of them, almost all of them, have fallen short, really describing the tech and the kind of hacker culture. I don't know if you've seen The Feed. When you described it, it kind of reminded me of that Amazon show, The Feed, where everyone has the chip implant.
Oh, I might have seen that. I've seen others where they go too far with brain implants and other things. There's that one about the woman who's married to the guy right now on Showtime, and he's monitoring her through her chip, and he can see through her eyes and everything, and she's been trying to get away from him. What one is that called?
Oh, was that a Black Mirror episode?
No, it's a season.
I think it was that too. Yeah, but it's a show.
It's something like Till Death Do Us Part or something like that. But it's a dark comedy. So I watch it because it's poking fun at all of this. But mine doesn't go so far into the realm of future. It is really focused on current tech and how current tech can be used to take control of all of us. The one who got me thinking about the chip implants was Scott McNeely when he was Sun Microsystems, totally promoting chips for his dog. Why can't I chip my children? And I went home after that session with it was a press meeting with Scott McNeely in a small group. And I went home to my kids, and 8 years old, 9 years old, and 12 years old. And I said, would you guys let me put a chip implant in you if it made you safer? And they said, no, I'd cut it out of my skin. And I said, good, I raised my kids right anyway.
That's
so
really
so
funny.
this is very interesting to me because I do have a chip in my hand.
Do you? Let me
So
see it. Does it show? Is there a bump?
Yeah. There's.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay. In the book, it happens right here. But yeah, and they wave it to buy groceries and scan things and they use it to get in their buildings and turn on their computers and start.
That's exactly what I use it for. Yeah. Well, for some of those things, not all those things. So I've got a high frequency NFC and low frequency RFID chip in it. And the low frequency RFID I use to get around my apartment complex. So to get in where the mailroom is and the Amazon locker, the doors to that, to the pool, to the clubhouse. I use my hand to open all those doors.
So what manufacturer made it for you? And like, how is it signaling to these devices? Is it going to a central location? Like in my book, that everything has to go back to data centers owned by Globecom for validation and verification.
Yeah. So, I mean, all RFID and NFC you can get little paper tags that have them in them. I mean, a lot of products that you buy just have them embedded in them. So there's no power source. Just a tiny amount of data can be stored on it, like 80 bytes to 160 bytes, sometimes a little bit more than that. But it's nothing more but, enough information to authenticate with something, or to just send a code. So that's it. You need an actual reader to power the thing up.
Okay. So that's how we have in the book, I have people who don't want the implants, but still need to buy things. They have like a piece of tape that they put on their wrist that it almost looks like a little piece of Braille tape with a tiny bit of circuitry in it to do the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, you could use a bit of just like aluminum tape or, anything that would shield a signal from going across, to block it. Sure.
Well, you're the beginning of the problem there. We're going to see these things get more powerful with more data, and someone's going to use them to control people eventually.
Yeah, so I would get 1,000 of these before I would put the Facebook app on my phone, for example. But like what's going on with the phones is a million times worse than anything you can do with the chip, especially if you've got full control over it. Because we don't have full control over our phones anymore.
And I think it's interesting that a lot of the distrust is with the government, air quotes the government, whichever government in country you live in. But it's really, I think for me, my distrust starts with the big corporations, Deb. And I think you've hit on that nicely in the description of your book already, right? And that's where my distrust goes, is for the big companies. It's really government that could actually be poised to help preserve privacy if they did it correctly.
The government has a lot more rules to follow than corporate America, and corporations actually have more rights than individual humans on a general basis. So you put all that together and then give something like Globecom all this power, all this control, all the data, and see what happens. It's not,
and pay less taxes in many cases.
Yeah. Well, the ones living off grid in the book don't pay any taxes.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Are there lessons in the book, Deb, for enterprise security, or like lessons in general for security? Like, did you have like lessons in mind that you wanted the reader to take away? Yeah,
the takeaway really is more about privacy and personal privacy. Like you said, Facebook, iPhones, we've already pretty much given up everything about us. But what happens if that information starts being used against us? Right now it's ads and other things to try to get us to buy things. But what if it starts being used to control us, to, even put us in work camps if we're not behaving? That kind of stuff is happening in the book. It also is to tell the tale of what hackers and cybersecurity professionals are really dealing with. There is one chapter where CISOs actually come under fire. A couple of them are killed. This is in a power play when Globecom goes down and the regional entities start going after each other to grab more of what they think is going to be a new Globecom. All of that story carries into the second and third book in the series. because they do manage to destroy most of Globecom in book number 1.
And you are completed with book number 2? How much do you want to tell our audience about
Book
that?
2 went out for review, and it got some pretty strong criticism on the first half. So I've been working on that pretty much as I can with another job and everything. And so it's very close to going to the publisher, but I want to send it out for one more review round first. So I'm guessing it'll probably be at the publisher by the end of September. My goal was to have it ready for the market during Christmas, but now it looks like, based on how long the publisher takes, probably more like late January.
Is that because there was more AI and machine learning, which is always a hotly debated topic?
Yes, I'm going farther into that. It's also because writing a sequel.
Yeah.
I tried to write for people who read the first book, and I showed it to people who did and who didn't read the first book. And it's sort of, I didn't spend enough time on the characters, of all things, in the first few chapters, because I figured everybody knew them. So it was more that kind of feedback I was getting. Why do I care about these characters? And just a little bit on the tech, but mostly about the characters. I do see this as a TV series, so I've really made the humanoids as interesting and real as I can without making any quote unquote Abbeys from NCIS. These people are real. They're people I know, and they are not stereotyped.
Yeah, it's funny in books. It's one of the things that, especially in serial novels, you get the most complaints about it. There's always this section that explains how the world works. Like if it's a book with magic in it, they have to explain how, what the rules are and set those,
Yep.
and they reintroduce all the characters, just in case somebody, picks up a book in the middle of the series. And for big fans of the series, like the publisher makes you put it in there, so that people can just pick up anywhere in the series and understand what's going on. But for people like me who will read something from book 1 through book 18, it's kind of annoying. It's like, give me a button or like a reference so I can skip the section.
Yeah. So Stephen Northcutt's been my best reviewer. I don't know if you guys know him. He's was one of the founders of the Sands Institute.
Yeah, love Stephen. My career wouldn't be what it is today without Stephen.
Same here. I wonder how many people he's helped in this
You're right.
world.
We're not the only ones either. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. Also, there's a lot of messaging in there too around cars are getting hacked to kill people. And so there's a lot of message around just connected devices in there as well.
Yeah. And that's, a lot of what you've said already, Deb, is a reality today too, right?
Yeah.
It makes me wonder how much fiction is in your work versus,
right.
What is actually possible today.
And that's why I'm interested to read it. I found, so something as a security professional that I've always done, and partially it's an excuse to just buy gadgets because I love gadgets.
I can see that. I can see that from your hand gadget.
Yeah. I found the best way to figure out like what the issues are with these things is to actually use them, and putting something in my hand is as far as I've gone. I've never had a piercing or a tattoo, like that it was a big jump for me. And I peppered the guy for a solid 2 hours with questions before having it done. But yeah, I find it's easy, to get scared of a thing, like less logic, more emotions take over, because it goes in your body, and I find, after having it, I've had it for maybe a year and a half, 2 years now, I'm much more scared of what I don't know about that's going on my phone than this thing in my hand. Like you can't do anything with this unless you're right up on it, you've got to basically press something against it to interact with it versus, anybody anywhere in the world, ad companies are getting a constant stream of stuff from my phone. And I don't really know what they're getting, and how often they're getting it and how they're using it. So to me, that's a lot more scary.
Well, I imagine that there's going to be a lot more data on those chips going forward. But also in the book, I have people like you who are using the chip and experimenting on the chip in their own skin. Others are hacking other people's chips, because what would happen if I was a type 1 diabetic with a certain blood type who needed care, and I don't have a chip to go in and validate my identity. So those people have learned how to walk by very closely with a reader in their pocket and do a scan on other people's chips and determine which ones they want the data from. They're good at decrypting them and using that data to make fake chips for patients and try to practice take care of their medical needs as responsibly as they can without hurting the original patient. It's very tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that stuff, I mean, there's diabetic patients with implants today. So it's very timely, because those are conversations we need to have. And none of the stuff, this thing in my hand isn't FDA approved. I had to sign all kinds of disclaimers to have it done. And there are people putting magnets in their hands, lights, all kinds of crazy stuff. Experimentation is going on right now.
Well, there are even all these neurolinks too. I'm very seriously thinking of bringing those up in book 3. Book 2 right now, I'm still reviewing and editing, but towards the end, some new characters are introduced, and they were actually sent by the AI, and they have brain links. And I'm thinking that in book 3, there's going to be brain to computing interaction that is going to be like nothing we've ever seen before. These people are already savants, and then they've got a brain implant. They've been sent by the AI to the development lab of the AI. So I want to see what's going to happen with that in book 3.
Yeah, what Elon Musk has done with Neuralink, I mean, not that he's really that directly involved in running the company, but when they shared some of what they had been working on, I was kind of shocked at how far along it was.
And then competitors are coming out of the woodwork for that too right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a company that I learned about years ago that had the sleep monitor, and it was like a device that was connected during sleep and monitored your sleep patterns. It was like almost like a neural interface. So that research has been going on for a long time, which is really
So imagine being able to do brain to computing development. That's where I'm thinking of taking book number 3.
Yeah, and that's fun stuff. There's a lot of that in. Have you read the Murderbot series, the Murderbot Diaries?
I haven't, but I'm writing that one down right now.
Oh, it's just like Adrian. It's a cyborg.
Yeah. So, I mean, the main character is a high anxiety, just kind of introvert android, not human. And it's so funny because, it's almost like the series started as a dare. Somebody said, see if you can make an android or a robot more relatable than the actual humans in the story, and that's kind of what everything's based on.
They did that. Yep.
Wow.
And it's hilarious. But it also has action, also has sci-fi, and in that world, it's fairly normal for humans to be augmented. And they do have a thing that they call the feed, and they can basically tap into these networks and interact with it without using an interface, just
there you go.
Thinking through it. So that's a really fun read if you want to dive into.
I will.
What
might
some
help
other
me
folks
with
have
book
done.
number 3. By the way, here's a picture of my book. I love the cover because it shows Globecom going down, and that's how I envisioned the Globecom logo to look when I told the artist. So I'm pretty proud of the way the cover looks too.
Yeah, it's good. I like the cover.
It's really awesome, Deb. Anything else you want to share with our audience about your book and upcoming books?
Buy them, help me get them on TV. If you know producers, please introduce me. It's all a game about who you know when it comes to Hollywood. So I do see this as a Netflix series. So I've got 3 scripts written off the first book already. So that would help a lot. If you guys know anybody who's a producer, send them my way.
Outstanding. Deb, thanks so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you.
Make sure you check out the book, Breaking Backbones, Information is Power. Coming up next, the Enterprise Security News. Stay tuned. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. ExtraHop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Wide-scale adoption of cloud applications, an increase in remote workers, and expansion of branch offices has rendered the centralized, on-premises security model impractical. Enter Cisco Umbrella. Umbrella now includes secure web gateway, firewall, and cloud access security broker functionality, plus integration with Cisco SD-WAN, all delivered from a single cloud security service. It helps businesses of all sizes secure their network and extend protection to roaming users and branch offices. Security doesn't have to be complicated. Get simple, smart, and powerful security with Cisco Umbrella. Visit securityweekly.com/Cisco Umbrella to learn more. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. The CyberRisk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score by visiting securityweekly.com/CIRB. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our first round of speakers, which includes Leslie Carhart, Dave Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Maria Chinavada, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Kevin Johnson, and so many more. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register today. On to the Enterprise Security News. Talk about some startup funding. You want to lead in with some startup funding?
Sure.
I thought there was some interesting rounds. There is a company called Hook Security. This was in South Carolina Research Authority, announced a $250,000 investment in Hook Security. They also received an additional investment in May, bringing it to a $500,000 backed startup that is in the business of launching, measuring, and automating cybersecurity phishing tests, which is a pretty crowded market and pretty advantageous. Like, they better have a good hook to, you know.
Hey-oh.
I don't think we've ever talked about a raise that small, actually.
Yes.
I sometimes
go deep into my sources to pull out funding that may not land in the major headlines that I normally check. So
yeah, and that's good. And you know, I mean, I'm not slamming small raises because those are some of the more interesting ones. You know, because they're very strategic or not trying to grow at all costs. Like,
right.
Oftentimes those will end up being the more interesting ones.
Yeah, and it's not a secret. I mean, I use Crunchbase and I go, filter and find latest cybersecurity funding and through the filters and all that stuff, and then I dig through, and you gotta weed some out. Like, some are like physical security, some are more like fraud prevention. Which, nothing against those industries, but I want a slightly narrower focus. And I thought the Hook Security was interesting because I believe it's such a crowded market, and I have discussions where I'm like, how much difference is there? And I know people who are in this, particular vertical might be up in arms, but like, what are your differentiators? What's so much, better or different about one security awareness phishing simulation vendor versus another? Deb mentioned KnowBe4, they do some of that. I mean, there's a whole host of vendors. What are the major differentiators between them? When I ask people, most people are like, as long as you got one, like, you're good. Like, find the one you get a best relationship with, which I find is very interesting.
Well, then add to that too the fact that how much differentiation can you build in from a technical perspective for $500,000 and still get the word out about your company?
Yeah, agreed. Tyler with his marketing hat on, go-to-market strategy, right? It's a great point, though.
I mean, even if let's say you just took half of it to build a better product, to build a better mousetrap, which probably takes way more than $250K. Let's say you pull it off with $250K. How do you even get the word out about it? That's why you don't ever see investments this small, because this just gets you to product market fit, and then you have to go get another one.
Yes. Yeah. You're going to have to raise to build that next AI ML engine that's going to present like far better phishing results and campaigns based on the company's data, which I'm sure some of the other players in the market already do.
Yeah.
And it looks like Hook is going after looks like Hooks is going after SMB, so they're going to need some kind of partner, some kind of channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, the smallest I ever see from an investment standpoint is 1 to 3 million in the pre-seed stages.
If you want to play an enterprise, Adrian brings up a good point.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, if you partner.
Yeah, if you want to play in enterprise. I guess if you want to play in SMB and do something super small with limited differentiation, you could enter that market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they start out at $40 a month for up to 25 users.
Interesting.
That's pretty cheap, yeah.
Yeah, like I can afford to train my kids at $40 a month. Jeez.
Right. Yeah, kind of interesting. Hunters raises $30 million in a Series B round to drive innovation, enhance customer satisfaction, and recruit more talent in the XDR space. It's an Israeli-based startup founded in 2018. They provide a turnkey data and security platform that aids effective detection and rapid response to security incidents.
And we're going to be looking at it next month.
Oh, nice. Good. I'm glad they're on the list.
Yeah. I've already had a conversation with their CEO, Yuri May, and he has given me the best definition for XDR so far.
Oh,
or the best explanation.
What a great little nugget of information Adrian just dropped there. Very nice.
And do you remember enough of it to share with the stupid people like me that still don't know what XDR is?
Yeah, it's not boiled down into a soundbite, but basically, it's clearly an evolution on SIM. And the interesting thing about that is most of the companies you see saying that they're doing XDR are EDR. So they're evolving from the EDR side, but it's all about boiling that data to a point where it's more useful. So there's elements of UEBA and SOAR in there also. So I think almost everybody is moving towards some capability to do automatic responses to things. In fact, we're testing vulnerability management tools right now, and even some of the vulnerability management tools have built-in SOAR type automations where they can remove a system from the network if its risk score is above a certain amount, like right after finishing a vulnerability scan, which I thought was interesting. Of course, they're doing that through like integration with carbon black response in one case I saw.
Yeah, I think to me, XDR is the topic we've always talked about. I put it in the context of my enchanted quadrants, right? Where you got to collect data from the network, data from logs from your systems, data from the endpoint, and even throw in a mix of threat intelligence on there and somehow put that together in a way where you can review incidents, look at indicators of compromise, and take actions.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, it's making SOC work suck less.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But
that's the goal of it, at least.
Yeah.
We'll find out next month if they're there.
Right, because there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, and I think that's why this space in particular, because you can even extend this capability outside of what is branded as XDR, there's so many different ways to do it because it's just such a niche thing for every organization. Some of this extends into the MDR market. Some, like, where do you put Logarithm? I would put Logarithm in that category, but I don't know if they're marketing as XDR, but they have all those components, certainly.
Yeah, Logarithm was one of the first SIMs that came out of the first generation of SIMs to really start moving more towards catering to operational workflows.
Yep.
And like they had SOAR-like functionality way back in like the mid 2000s, late 2000s, something like that. I remember looking at them and being really shocked at how far they had come along versus the ArcSights and the Envisions and all those guys.
And I think what we've seen is SOAR largely as a feature, or if it's a standalone thing you're going to go get, it's because you don't have those capabilities in your existing product suite. Yeah,
and still, the problem here is what I like to call the customization tax. Like these SIM, SOAR, like all these SOC tools, I think it's healthier to think of them as development platforms, not as fully baked products. Mm-hmm. Because when you talk to people who have just bought one, like the first questions are, okay, now what do we do with it? Like you know, what, you know, do you have playbook examples somewhere? Like most of the ones built into the product aren't that useful. You know, so it's kind of like a cart before the horse type of situation where a lot of people buy these before they know what they're going to use them for. You know, and I think that should be a lot clearer to most people before they actually make that purchase.
You need to have a game plan before you go recruit your players.
Yeah, because then you're, you know, what are you left with? You know,
right. It's the opposite. You're getting all the players, and you're like, all right, how do I make all these players work together? Right? That's a flawed strategy, in my opinion.
Oh crap! We get 30 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
What do we? They're all going to get creamed.
Now you're breeding my anxiety. I got to do this fantasy football thing, and I don't nothing. I've never done fantasy football. I mean, I kind of follow football, but not really. So yeah. I need help. Johnny's going to help me. My nephew's going to help me. Like, can I write isn't there a Python script I can write for this?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I was invited to do some fantasy F1, so I'm kind of in the same position. I know just enough about it to make some really bad mistakes.
Is it like a pole position? Is that F1? Or was that the video? There was a video game pole position. Anyway, getting off topic.
Yeah, that's a general term, actually. You know, I think they use that term in many different racing sports. That just means like you've qualified at the top. You know, you get to start out in front.
I bet in fantasy F1 that if you qualify pole position, you probably get extra points.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I'll let you know.
Cloudflare is claiming they defended against the largest DDoS attack, or detected and mitigated, the article says. The attack sent 17.2 million requests per second to the organization's server in order to, obviously, blah, blah, blah. They're claiming it's the largest one. It's pretty interesting.
That's kind of weird. Like, everybody shares DDoS attack size. Like the metric for that, the measurement is volumetric, not quantitative. Like you always hear like certain number of terabits per second, or gigabits per second. I've never heard anybody talk about it in terms of requests per second.
They're stating
they've made it impossible to compare.
They're stating it was devices in 125 different countries from the Mirai botnet.
God.
Which Mirai refuses to die because there's all kinds of IoT and embedded systems hanging out there on the internet that are just ripe for. Which is interesting because if you think about it too, Mirai is like theoretically scary for a lot of reasons. You think about how much faster embedded systems or IoT devices have gotten, even in just the past 10 years. Looking at the Raspberry Pis, I had to go look at the comparison chart, and you can see like the amount of computing power that they're putting in these tiny little devices now. As well, I mean, it's Moore's law, right? I mean, it's exponential. So, utilizing these things, there are more of them, and they've got more computing power, which is amazing.
And there's a few things interesting about this. I mean, I was shocked to find out. I interviewed Derek Mankey for an SE Media thing the other day, and that was one of the things that has come out in Fortinet's latest research, is that Mirai is still a big deal. And I just hadn't heard about it in a while, so I was kind of shocked that it was, because it set some original records for volumetric attacks. That Akamai absorbed some of that. Took Dyn down. Mm-hmm. I think that was shortly before Oracle acquired them, I think. But Dyn was provided so much DNS, it took down large chunks of SaaS products in the internet at the time. And back then, Mirai was like 200,000, 300,000 devices strong. And now it's hitting with bigger attacks, but only with a fraction of that, with only 20,000 devices. So these must be much beefier devices.
Well, I think also it's probably different style of DDoS, right? So if you're talking about volumetric,
could be, yeah.
Like large packet kind of network layer bandwidth crushing style DDoS, that's very different than I think this one, which is RPS based, which you could have a request if it's targeting like a search bar or something that's open but chews up a fair amount of compute in the target. and you can hit that with fast enough RPS, you could knock down the entire system that way too, without having to volumetrically clog the pipes, right? So I think you were right in the opening statements when you talked about comparing apples and oranges. That could be what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, they've had 3 years to optimize how it takes stuff down, right? So all kinds of research.
I mean, you got the pipe clogging, then you've got the memory chewing, you've got the CPU chewing style, right? So they're all different style of DDoS.
Yeah.
I was trying to unpack this security scorecard and Tenable integration. They say that security scorecard will deploy its real-time visibility services into Tenable's analytics and cyber monitoring services. And I thought security scorecard was primarily a third-party kind of play. But are you bringing in third-party data, or is it changing, right? So is that it's just more vulnerability data that's being plugged into Tenable through security scorecard?
They're doing actual risk and vulnerability scoring and taking into account mitigating factors and other pieces of data like that. So if they can get data from Tenable on mitigating factors connected with the scores of vulnerabilities that are already in there, they can have like a security scorecard version of risk pertinent to you as an organization. That's where they're really starting to push their research instead of just doing third-party style stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like the security scorecard data comes into the Tenable console.
That's right.
That gives you, because it's that problem that vulnerability vendors have always struggled with. How do I prioritize 200,000 vulnerabilities that I just discovered yesterday? How do I prioritize it? It's not, that's the play.
Well,
absolutely. That's where security scorecard is getting deeper and deeper. They're doing much more big data analytics, ML, AI kinds of things to get more accurate quantitative measures of risk.
It's all answering that question. What do I fix first?
Right. So one of the interesting things here is this could be kind of like a attack surface management play for Tenable.
Sounds like
it. But like the big gulf between attack surface management, what security scorecard is doing, and what some of the traditional vulnerability management products are doing is an asset is still very much something that's tied to an IP, or it's some kind of computing resource. It's not a DNS name. It's not a code repo somewhere. So we've got this kind of new idea of what an asset is, and the vulnerability management companies haven't made that leap yet.
They will. They have to, because everything's going software-defined, cloud-native, digital transformation. All of that is pushing the definition of asset into something that it doesn't. It has to be very, very different than what it has been historically. And so I think you'll see the vuln management systems move towards that direction as well.
And this could have been that, but I don't think it is. It looks like it still has to be something on the Tenable side, that has an IP attached to it, or that it's enriching stuff that your Tenable scans have found, right?
Yeah, that's been a struggle. I mean, having worked in VM, right? The scanners traditionally were based on IP addresses and domain names, and it was always a challenge architecturally, because like Nessus, when Renault was 18, he wrote Nessus, everything had to have an IP address, and that architecture carried through. And I think they've been working slowly to shift that architecture, but it's really hard because the core of it wants an IP address.
That's absolutely right. And I think what you're seeing is the beginnings of that transformation, both in cyber asset management, vulnerability management, as well as scoring, right? Risk scoring and quantification.
Well, and on top of that, there's kind of a new way of looking at devices and assessing risk from them. Like one of the things I found really interesting when we did the attack surface management review was, one company would float to the surface websites that had old copyright dates on it. So if at the bottom of the web page it says copyright 2008, it looks like it might be an abandoned website domain host, infrastructure. So that's it's not a vulnerability. It's not something any kind of scanner would come back and say this is vulnerable to an exploit or something like that. But it kind of comes across as a really good way of identifying something that's been forgotten about, which is going to have risks in it. Maybe you don't have to find the vulnerabilities. All you need to know is this thing is abandoned and should be taken down. Like forget thinking about vulnerabilities. Just reduce your attack surface. Get rid of the stuff that nobody's using anymore. And that actually goes into one of my stories.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's is it TinyCheck? No, it's not TinyCheck. Google Cloud launched a tool, I guess it is, called Unattended Project Recommender. Kind of a like that's a mouthful. Kind of an unwieldy name there, but it's a feature of, and AWS kind of has this concept also. Like they also have a product, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now. Maybe one of you can remind me. But it basically makes recommendations to you. It looks at what you've got in your cloud and says, hey, you're doing something stupid, or this isn't optimal. And that's one thing I love about Google Cloud. I think one of the first times I used Google Cloud, I deployed an appliance into it. And after a month, it was like, hey, you're using too big, of a compute resource for this. Like you could actually downgrade this and save some money, for what this resource is using. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So the idea behind this is using machine learning. It can kind of figure out, you're not using this anymore. Nobody's using this. It's kind of abandoned. Maybe you want to think about shutting this down.
Yeah, I like that, because I feel like even still today, that old kind of pen tester methodology of going, I want to go after the stuff that they probably don't know about or has just been hanging around and no one's paying attention to. There's a lot of good reasons why attackers will go after that, and we see that with data breaches today as well, because if it's not actively being worked on, maybe it's not actively being monitored. Also, if it's not being worked on, it's not being updated. Maybe it doesn't have the latest security protections they've been putting into the newer applications or systems. So discovering that is hard, and tools that can help me with that is great. And I like the tools in the cloud too, because you may have spun stuff up in the cloud and it just works. And you're like, oh yeah, I should probably update that, but it's just working. And I think a lot of us are in that same boat.
Yeah, I can't wait for them to turn this on for my code, because I have been getting charged literally 2 cents a month for 7 years on a project, and I can't figure out how to turn it off. So I'm waiting for them to auto delete it for me.
Right.
That's funny.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I'm terrible about that too. Like I'll use AWS for some project or a workshop or something like that, and just take my eyes off it. And 2 years later, that crap is still running, and I've been getting charged $30-$40 a month for it.
It's not Amazon Inspector. Was that the one you were thinking about?
No, it's like Cloud Wizard or something like that. I forget what it's called.
It's the most frustrating thing in the world, though, Adrian, to get charged 2 cents a month. 2 cents,
right?
$40. I'll find it. 2 cents is not worth me to find it.
Right. Let's see. So Sumo Logic, we talked about that in the teaser for the show. So they obviously did acquire DF Labs, but now they're making a product announcement. So they've actually done something to help integrate and bring that product to market in a unified manner. So, if you're a Sumo Logic customer, now is probably a good time to go, hey, look at the SOAR component. Back to our previous discussion about, SOAR being a feature. I think this is a prime example. Also, what was the other one I wanted to cover? Oh, Blue Mira raised $10.3 million. We missed one when we were talking about raises.
Yeah. So, sorry, I jumped over to this other one just because it was, the idea of getting rid of abandoned stuff was just similar. But yeah, I've got that one in mind as well. Yeah, it's a good size Series C.
It's a cloud-based SIM is how they're positioning it. Could that really be like the XDR play? Really?
Oh, this is I was looking at a different one. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. This was a Blue Mira Series A.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, clicked on the wrong tab. Yeah, it's interesting. So John Oberheid of Duo Security is behind this one, which was kind of confusing because one of the reports I said Duo Security was one of the investors. You know, it didn't mention it was someone, you know, one of the co-founders of Duo. I was like, how does that work? You know, they were acquired by Cisco a couple of years ago. They can still make independent investments. Isn't that Cisco Ventures? But yeah, no, it's him personally, and it's always interesting to see, you know, leaders in the cybersecurity vendor space, you know, kind of put what they put up their own money on. So it does seem kind of late to market, you know, so they must have something, you know, fairly special in this space. Are you familiar with this one, Tyler?
I'm not, but what caught my eye is it's Ann Arbor based. So of course, John was going to jump all over that, right? It's in his backyard. Even if it's, you know, semi-differentiated, and maybe the only differentiation is that its tools designed specifically for mid-market companies. And if that's the case, maybe he's like, hey, there's a gap in market there that there doesn't need to be any technical differentiation or limited technical differentiation. There might be, but maybe there isn't.
It seems like there, and John's a really smart guy, right? My guess is there might have been a noticeable gap where MDR starts to fall off, and you're not quite ready for a full enterprise SOC, and there's this kind of mid-market play that needs a really good, easy-to-deploy solution, which Blue Mirror has. I mean, it's really a very user-friendly, quick. When it says it's turnkey, I mean, it really is. That's one of their goals, is to make deployment very, very easy and have some usability there. So.
Yeah, I mean, SIEMs are traditionally very heavy, you know, very, very labor intensive. So yeah, I would expect something like this to have a ton of features crammed in and to be a lot easier to use, a lot simpler to use. And the funny thing is, like, if you get that formula right, then, you know, down the road, Series E, you know, you're going to be great for the enterprise too.
Yeah, or go towards the MDR market as well and get picked up by the providers. So. Have both.
Yep.
What else we got this week? Nothing else was really blah blah blah. I covered all the ones that I really wanted from my list. Adrian, I don't know if you got more on yours.
Yeah, one more raise upstream. Raised $62 million in a Series C. They're calling it cloud-based security, but they're specifically automotive focused. I'm not terribly familiar with them, but it is interesting in 2021 to still see articles starting with a reference to Miller and Velasquez's Jeep Cherokee stunt hack.
Oh my God! Everyone talks about that. Everyone talks about that hack.
It's like
6 years later, still the opener.
I know. At what point is that like use something else? You got to reference something a little more recent than that.
Yeah, but I mean, that was the perfect storm where, you know, they did amazing research, but it just happened to be in a vehicle that they could sit a journalist in, like, while they did it. And that perfect storm just leads to an epic reference anytime anyone talks about automotive security. And I believe this is for autonomous vehicles, is kind of their focus here, right?
Yeah, and it's almost like a Blue Mirror, you know, but specifically for this vertical. You know, so there's like a automation component, you know, threat analysis component, you know, threat hunting type component, visibility. Sorry, Tyler.
No, I was just going to say, I wonder exactly what it does, because, you know, the concept of hacking cars has been around, as we know, for 6-7 years, based on the Chris and Charlie hacks being, let's call that one of the first ones. And fundamentally, like, have we really gotten any better? We're still seeing significant major car accidents. We've seen extension in the quantity of compute systems that are in every car, the bus systems. Yeah. I'm just not, I guess, anymore. You know, expectations are low.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's a big raise, but this is a super niche category where it's and I wonder if it's not a bit early, you know, because totally I agree with them. Like, there's tons of data coming out of these cars, all the different computing systems that they have in them, you know, computer vision, you know, all the different components that have to talk to one another. So I wonder how evolved this is, like what that threat map looks like for where you're actually going to be looking for threats and what that data looks like. I'd be very interested to see like get a briefing on this and see like a demo of the product.
Yeah, I would too, because quite frankly, having gotten burned on mobile security, right, trying to do a lot of investment in mobile security when that was the hot thing, I see this likely maybe being the same end result, in that maybe we actually build this automotive system securely from the ground up, God forbid, and it goes the way of mobile security in the sense that nobody really uses it anyways.
Or you see like Lookout was the only big winner that I can even recall coming out of mobile security. There were so many companies that just disappeared.
Yeah,
you had Lookout and you had the MDMs, but do we need an AV for your car? Probably not if we do it right. And do we need a MDM style mobile device management or automotive device management? Maybe if we're running a fleet of cars, but certainly not on an individual basis. So I'm not sure where else you go.
Yeah, I think the investment's probably banking on the market for autonomous vehicles exploding in the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely,
and that being
and I think it is too.
Primary transportation, right? I mean, it's already in a lot of major cities. Where I live, it is not. But in a lot of other major cities, there is autonomous transportation that is available. I want to say San Francisco is one of them, right? And I think that's only in Vegas. And, I think also the pandemic kind of drove that shift too, where you don't want to do a ride share and have another person in the car, which is interesting.
And I think with the growth of EVs, the electric vehicle side of it is going to continue to push forward the technology that we're putting in cars rapidly enough that the automated driving systems are, they're already beginning to take place. They're just going to continue to roll out drastically, and that's where this investment is on the back of.
I just can't help but think of that Silicon Valley episode where the dude gets in the car and ends up on a container ship. He gets in an autonomous vehicle and it ends up on a container ship somewhere. Did you guys see that show? No.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some emotions driving this. Like even in the article, they say, the idea of having someone hijack your car remotely and start blaring music as it crashes you into a wall is scary. And I mean, we've seen plenty of that in TV and movies and stuff like that. The future where somebody just takes over your car and starts messing with it. So I guess the buyers here are going to be operators, not necessarily manufacturers. Of these vehicles, right?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. You talked about AV for your car, right? Does it eventually come down to the consumer? Which is interesting because safety.
I hope not.
I mean, safety gear in cars always comes with it because it's been mandated by regulation. And your seatbelts come with your car.
I would
right?
100% argue that if it ends up being in the hands of the consumer from a security perspective to secure their own car, even if they do it, it'll never work properly because of inconsistent deployment models, et cetera. Right. The only way it works is if, similar to the way phones in general have done it, and that's they build it properly, securely from the ground up. So it has to happen, I guess, at the manufacturer level.
Yeah, I mean, so they're saying they currently have close to 4 million connected vehicles from 6 different OEMs on its platform across US, Europe, and Japan. So, folks are using it. So I guess I see it like what's that?
I said that could be manufacturers in certain regions, right? Like Japanese manufacturers of selling Japanese cars in Japan are using it, or I don't see it being like a consumer level deployed add-on that you would put in play.
Because I mean, mostly you're connecting your phone to your car anyway from a user experience perspective, and that's even the device that interfaces with it. Or in the future, maybe Adrian's chip in his hand just automatically talks to his car.
Yeah. So they actually have them for just unlocking and starting your Tesla. There are implants specifically made to mimic those little like credit cards, that you get as like an alternate key to using your phone. But I could even see a use case for like an Uber or a Lyft. Anybody who has a large fleet of cars that wants to detect any anomalies that would suggest something funny's going on with with a large fleet. I could see being a use case for a tool like this, where they're trying to detect threats and anomalies across just a ton of telemetry data coming in from vehicles.
Cool.
They call it a VSOC, a Vehicle Security Operations Center.
A VSOC.
That sounds very cool.
It does. Anything else really cool you want to talk about?
Let's see. I had a couple I could definitely.
You can tell this was a light week for enterprise security product announcements and funding. Kind of light this week.
I've got a bunch of bizarre stuff on here.
That's what we end up doing. We end up just talking about bizarre stuff.
Yeah. So I've got like a minimalist phone, that like the idea is like some days you don't want to carry your smartphone. You want to be a little more present in whatever you're doing, or don't want, to worry about what people are putting in Slack. So there's a new minimalist phone. It's like $300. I don't know why.
Yeah, I can't.
Just get an old Nokia. Like why are you going to spend $300 on this?
Because the old Nokia won't take your SIM card. That's why.
Right. Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's the 3G that I think even 3G, some of them are starting to drop some of the old technologies. I know 2G is like almost gone in a lot of places. A company called Paladin publicly launched Nighthawk, a first response drone for cities. So I don't know if you guys have ever played any of these games where you can like take over drones and like screw with them. What is that game? Help me out here, guys.
I don't know the game you speak of.
Oh, it's
no clue here.
Is it a game where you take over drones?
Yes. Yeah. It's
Grand Theft Auto.
I play it, and what the heck is wrong with my brain?
Can you draw a picture? Is this like?
It'll come to me in a moment. But yeah, that's what
it's charades. It's charades. Can you act it out?
I mean, it's one of the major mechanics of this game. Somebody will pop in and remind me what it is. But one of the major mechanics is you take over surveillance cameras, and you can laterally move through cameras to drones. Drones can go to different places that people can't go. And kind of drop in from the sky. And flip switches on and off. So it's a major mechanic of the game. So every time I see something about like a non-military drone use case, I start thinking about this game because, it takes place in a future where there's drones in the sky shipping packages. There's security drones, like there's like all these different use. Yeah, Watchdogs. Thank you.
Watchdogs.
Yeah, so at least the only one I've played is the most recent one, which is Watch Dogs Legion, and that's like one of the core mechanics of the game is you're constantly taking over drones and flying them around and using them to do stuff. Like in some cases, you don't even have to like take any big risks. You don't have to risk getting shot. You can just take over a drone and have it do all the dirty work. And if it gets destroyed, you just grab another one. Hack another one, have it do your dirty work for you. So it looks like this is, we're starting to see more of these. And it's interesting because Amazon, what do they call it? Prime Air was the name of the subsidiary. Amazon created a company just to develop the drones that were going to ship packages for Amazon.
And are they still doing that today? I feel like it's something we've talked about, but
I don't think they've shut it down, but the CISO that I knew that used to be there is gone. Like all the people that I used to know that were there have all moved on. So it seems like
it's kind of
they either cut down the size of it. I think they hit maybe a road, and this is just me guessing. I don't have any inside detail, but I suspect they've hit some regulation hurdles.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see another one that's suggesting, that this is something that the city would own and maintain, and these would, so initially these drones would have like thermal cameras and stuff like that, provide intel for firefighters and first responders so that they have advanced knowledge of what they're getting into when they show up on site, like specifically where the incident is happening, so that might give them some insight on where best to park the fire, the different assets that they need to respond to the incident. So Yeah, interesting days. I'm sure somebody at some point will hack these things, and like we'll see all kinds of new drone research as we see more of these private drone products coming out.
Yeah, and if it's left up to the city or town to maintain the security of these, that could also get interesting too.
Yeah. So there's an acquisition we didn't mention. Build.security was acquired by Elastic. I know.
What is Build.security?
I wasn't familiar with them, but I think Sunil, I saw him mention it. I think he was like an advisor or something like that for him.
He was. He's an advisor there. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about the company, Tyler?
No, I believe it's centered around authentication, authorization management across devices. But honestly, I'm definitely not an expert on Build Security's business.
Okay. So yeah, interesting to see, Elastic is building out the security side of things more. I keep forgetting that they acquired Endgame. So this is their second security acquisition. So they're starting to build out the security side of their business. They also have a SIM, but they don't consider that pure play on the security side.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of use cases for, log aggregation and management that aren't security related.
Very nice. Well, that will conclude the enterprise security news for this week. Kind of a light news on stories, so we got a chance to talk about bizarre stuff. Thank you, Adrian and Tyler, for the bizarre stuff conversation. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time on Enterprise Security Weekly.